So the more I dug in, the more I realized that not only are we being deceived by the information that's coming out, we're also being censored on the other side. So you're going to be filled with this information and not allowed to see any of the other information, and you're only going to get one perspective on this. And the more that happened over time, the more I resisted, and the more I realized the deceptions went really deep. And eventually things ended up in Ottawa at a trucker Freedom Convoy that assembled and went across the country to push back against some of the decisions that were being made. And initially I didn't really know much about what that was, other than through a little bit of social media posts. And when they indicated they were going to be arriving in Ottawa, tomorrow, I thought, this is sounding like a pretty big thing. I might want to go and have a look. This sounds kind of historic, so just want to go have a see. So I got in my car with my son and I said, you want to go down there for a day and have a look? So we drove down there and I couldn't believe what I saw. I couldn't believe how big this event really was. It was big, it was beautiful, it was friendly, it was peaceful, but it was really growing. It was getting big. And so you can imagine thousands and thousands of people gathering in the extreme cold. Weather was about -30, it was snowing. And people need to eat. People are looking for a washroom. People are looking for logistical support. The trucks need to keep running. Where are they going to get the fuel? This became a real complicated issue. And I had met up with some people that I knew over the last few years that were thinking the same way I was thinking about this nonsense, and people in law enforcement as well. So I said, do you need some help here? And they said, yes, absolutely. We're going to need a lot of logistical support. So I very quickly went back, another 6-7 hour drive back to home base to drop off my son, and turned around and did another 6-7 hour drive back to get there. And I had packed a suitcase with some clothing and said, yeah, I guess I'm going to be here for a while. So while I was there, I did everything from helping to put toilets in the right place and make sure there was enough toilet paper where it needed to be, and to arrange the pumping out of these toilets, and making sure everybody had water, and we had food stations set up, and making sure that the truckers had fuel that they'd need. But a couple of times somebody asked me to get up on a stage and speak publicly about my position on this. And every time I speak publicly, it's always with respect to the Canadian Charter of Rights, the Canadian Bill of Rights, the International Declaration of Human Rights, and how we have a right to be here and we have a right to do this peacefully. And where we were thinking it might need a little bit of policing to keep things safe and peaceful, it didn't. Everybody was so happy. There are some problems. If you're originally from Canada, you would know that the West and the East don't always mix, and that French side doesn't always mix, and the languages don't always mix, except in Ottawa at this time. And everybody was high-fiving and hugging and crying together from east to west, French, English, all religions, all walks of life, every race, color, and creed. We were all there for the same thing, and it was very, very jubilant. Until the government said, hey, get out of here. We want you guys to leave. And we didn't feel that that was right. We felt it was unconstitutional. And so we decided to stay. And at one point, we finally decided to do a national press release. And I was part of that national press release. And in my statement in front of the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation cameras, I asked all Canadians to come to Ottawa and support this movement. And I guess as a result of asking Canadians to come and support us, the government invoked the Emergency Measures Act and chose to start freezing people's bank accounts. And my bank account was frozen. So within 2-3 days following that, the police moved in heavy numbers and started to arrest a lot of people and really put the boots to people. We had the horses come in and trample people. It became very violent on the side of policing, and I was just disgusted at what I saw. So when we finally chose to leave, because things were getting very violent on the side of the government and the police services, we connected with a legal team on our way out, and they said, we're going to have to file a judicial review request, which is we're going to have to take this matter to court and get a superior court to make a ruling on, was this legal or illegal for the government to do what it did? And that announcement just came out about a week ago, and we have our decision. And, I made some, it was a 200-page decision. And the highlights that I took away from that, I have about 5 or 6 real highlights, but that's kind of short for a 200-page decision. So just to kind of summarize of the highlights.
And just for people who are listening, in case anybody doesn't know, what happened was, I'm sorry to interrupt you, just in case people haven't followed closely. So last week, a court ruled that what the federal government did when they invoked the Emergencies Act in an attempt to shut down the Freedom Convoy, the court ruled that this was unconstitutional and not legal, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Actually, what they said was that before they came in to shut it down, they declared, they invoked the National Emergencies Act, the Emergency Measures Act. That's like making a declaration that, there's a war in the country. It's this thing. And when they do that, it gives the government extreme powers. It basically says you can do whatever you want now. Mm-hmm. Okay. Extreme powers. And so the justice made a ruling on what happened. And the short version of what he said was, if you got a mosquito, you're going to use a fly swatter, but you took out a cannon to try to get that mosquito. You went way beyond using the amount of, resources you had. And there were many, many other ways to resolve this. And the Emergency Measures Act is a last resort, and you had no authority to do that. So the first thing they said is that the cabinet within government was not entitled to alter the interpretation of the Emergency Measures Act, because they were saying, well, we interpreted it this certain way. Okay. But it's clearly defined within the act. But they made up another interpretive version and said it's okay, we can do that. We can.
What was their interpretation or their claimed interpretation?
Well, there were several points that they made up, thinking that this is going to help our case. And one of them was that, it's harming the country financially. It's harming the country financially. Well,
as if the lockdowns didn't and all the vaccine mandates.
Yeah, but there's nothing in the Emergency Measures Act that says anything about financial harms to the country. That's not what it's intended for. So that was one. It was that the judge just said, okay, that was your reason, and I'm telling you that's not even allowed. Number 2 was that the convoy did not fit the definition of national emergency. Okay, whatever your definition of national emergency was, it didn't even fit that. The third was that the Emergency Measures Act is to be a tool of last resort. And clearly, there was a lot of things they could have done. I mean, there were no weapons involved. They stated that there were. There was no violence. They said that there was. That's not true. It was becoming one big unity, jubilant Woodstock is what it was. People were so happy. And the music was getting louder and louder. And you can imagine you're doing this right on the front steps of government. They don't like that. The other one was that there were no threats to the security of Canada by definition of the act. It says there has to be a threat to the country. And by this point, when they invoked the act, there had been some bridge closures across the country and other areas where there were other protests that were breaking out. But they had all been resolved by this point. Everything had been cleaned up by this point. And Ottawa was the last location. So you don't have a national emergency all across the country. You're having it happen in this one little spot in the national city, the capital. Mm-hmm. And the last one, the point being that banning attendance at the protest violated the freedom of expression. So the news and the government was saying, you can't come to Ottawa, you can't be there. We've created this red zone. We've identified the area. Anybody caught in this area is going to be arrested. So if Megan decided, hey, let's go to Ottawa and have a look, I don't know what's going on. And you could even be on the other side of this argument. But you know, if you're going to be there, you're going to be arrested. No, you can't do that. That's a rights violation in itself. And then the last point was the freezing of bank accounts violated the Charter of Rights unreasonable search and seizure clause. And certainly that's where I got caught up. And I'll tell you about the unreasonable search and seizure. So as somebody who has been in law enforcement for 32 years, in order for me to get a criminal conviction against anybody or any conviction, you need what's called reasonable and probable grounds. So the grounds for getting a conviction is that your grounds were reasonable and they were probable. But in order to lay a charge, let alone a conviction, if we're going to lay a charge, we have to have reasonable suspicion. And that's fair. And that's the system that we play in. But when the superintendent of the RCMP in charge of intelligence, and RCMP is the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. So that's like the American version of the FBI. So when the head of intelligence for that organization who was put in charge of it was a superintendent, and he's not the head of the organization, but when the superintendent Baudouin, who was in charge of the freezing of the bank accounts and making these financial orders to the banks, when he was questioned about his analysis process in whose accounts get frozen, he admitted that it was just what they believed. It wasn't based on reasonable grounds. It wasn't based on reasonable suspicion. It was having belief. And belief is extremely low on the requirements. So if you just thought, we think that guy should have his accounts frozen just because we think so, then we're going to freeze his accounts. Mm-hmm. And so the judge was scathing in his ruling to say, you can't do that. And by the way, the same superintendent admitted that as the days went on, they were just kind of flying by the seat of their pants in how they were handling this. There was no policy. They were just kind of making up rules as they went along. And that's not what you do before you freeze somebody's bank account. If they want to freeze my bank account, they go before a judge, they submit all of their evidence, and then an independent body like a judge or a court will hear the evidence and say, yeah, you've got grounds, we believe that you should do that.
What would be reasonable grounds to freeze someone's bank account? Like, under what circumstances could the government ever have the power to freeze someone's bank account?
So let's say there is evidence to support you're a drug dealer and that's where you've got your money. Let's say there's evidence to support that you're a terrorist, right? Well, Chrystia Freeland, who is Canada's Deputy Prime Minister, had scribbled on her notepad, let's label them as terrorists and freeze their accounts.